Okay, that's it. We're live. Welcome to the show, Max Klein.
Thank you
Ma-
for having me.
Absolutely. So, hi to all the spectators watching right now. My name is Christian Peverelli, and I am the CEO of We Are No Code. And today I have a very special guest, Max Klein. He is a serial entrepreneur. He's also worked inside of large companies as kind of an intrapreneur. He's going to share a little bit about his story. He also is a no-coder, but he's a non-technical founder who kind of turned into a no-coder. So it's a great story. Max, thanks so much for joining.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I
So why
love
don't
that
you give
word.
us
No coder.
no-coder? There you go. You've been baptized.
Oh, thank you.
So why don't you tell us a little bit, your story in terms of like, what you've done, what your experience
Sure.
is, sort of a bit focused around the fintech stuff, and then we'll get
Yeah.
into no code after that.
Sure thing. Yeah. So I started my adventures into entrepreneurship and starting companies a little over 10 years ago when I was still in college. At that time, I got really interested in kind of what was happening with technology, mobile, and really like was introduced. I got lucky where I had a very close friend of mine who ended up going on to Y Combinator and starting really big companies. But I was lucky where he like introduced me to a lot of these really interesting aspects of startups that I kind of immediately fell in love with. So in college and after college, I basically like engulfed myself in the startup world, starting companies on the side. None of them were huge successes, but I was really just very much obsessed with the culture and the people around that startup scene, and eventually went on to product management, where I served as head of product for a couple companies before founding a company called Float in 2014. Float was it was a mobile first credit experience that allowed young thin file millennials, those who didn't have any sort of credit history or very thin credit history, access and build credit that would help them either smooth out their income gaps, avoid overdraft, really kind of get them started on the path to adulthood, because we all know how important your credit score is for you. After I started that company, after about 2.5 years, that company was acquired by a company called Opportune, which me and the core team moved to, where we built out and led their new product division. At Opportune, I served as their head and general manager of new products. For about 2.5 years, they recently went IPO. And after their IPO in 2019, that was when I felt it was kind of my time there, and that I got kind of that itch to come back into startups. So right now I'm I'm helping out a couple companies, talking to great folks like Christian, and just eager to see what everybody's building right now. I think it's an amazing time to be a startup entrepreneur right now, even though some people probably disagree with me, but I think it's a very interesting time.
Yeah, well, I really love how humble you are for the level of success that you've seen in the early years of your entrepreneurship. Definitely. So that's super interesting. I mean, like, I think like me, having started companies, and we're non-technical founders in the sense that we're not coders.
Mm-hmm.
You really went through this thing where with Float you build everything with custom code, and then you kind of, so tell us about how you kind of like how no code came about and how it affected the way that you started building products, and also to tell us, of course, the great story about how you sort of built a no code / low code tool and launched it inside of Opportune, right? Or for Opportune.
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of the introduction to the low code, no code movement was quite serendipitous, actually. Like, I wasn't looking for it. I didn't. The tools that I had come across in my early days of entrepreneurship They were very rudimentary. It was very much focused on static-based content that was served up from a CRM. You could think of this like, Wix, Squarespace, WordPress, things like that. And there was always just so many limitations on them. And either it was very limiting or they, in terms of WordPress, they came with so much that you just didn't need. And so I never really kind of thought about low code, no code until I came across these much more modern tools like Airtable, Webflow, Retool. And this is when I really got re-excited about the market, because this is something that is so empowering for folks like myself who, have all these ideas constantly, but I'm not a developer by nature. I've been in and around the industry long enough that I'm somewhat technical, but these tools have really been able to accelerate, my ability to take something from idea to proof of concept. And so, to go back a little at Float, this was still roughly the days when there wasn't a lot of great tools to empower someone like myself, who is a non-technical founder, to do much of anything. And so, and also, I always thought, you needed a CTO. Like, that was the mainstay. That was the story. And
that's classic.
They always said, like, oh, you can't even raise capital unless you have a technical co-founder. And this is something that I actually proved is incorrect. But the truth was, I went through this process of struggling to find that technical co-founder because, let's be honest, like, they're in such high demand, and so many non-technical entrepreneurs are looking for people like this. And it's very hard to pull them away from their, $250,000 a year job at Facebook and Google and Twitter. And so, at the time, it was a challenge. I was lucky enough to actually get introduced to some great developers, and I'm forever grateful for them. I still work and I'm close with them today. But once I came to Opportune, I'll kind of fast forward a bit. Once I came to Opportune, and my kind of resources were trimmed down quite dramatically, because I had no longer had a team of 5 engineers that I had at Float. It was kind of me and one technical person, and we were tasked to build basically like an end-to-end consumer application. We really had to start getting creative about how to accelerate and amplify our own skill sets. My skill sets was more in the product and design. My technical counterpart was more in back-end architecture, things like that. So we really started to look for tools that would help us accelerate our ability to push a product to market. And that's when we came across Webflow and Airtable, and I'm like, my eyes were wide open to this, it was like I was reintroduced to something where I thought would never happen, and now years later I'm like, wow, it's finally like almost happening.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's crazy. And that feeling that you described is exactly the same feeling I had. It was like an eye-opening moment of like, oh, okay, like building stuff, cool. And then suddenly you realize, like, wait, I can do that with Webflow or with Bubble or with Airtable, Retool. It's like, and then it just made me realize, like, oh, wow, so I don't have to go and hire those 2 people, or I don't have to wait for a technical co-founder to like launch this into the market, test it out, and see if people are responding to it. And that, for me at least, like fundamentally changed the way. So yeah, We Are No Code is fully built with no code as well. So tell us about this awesome, because you launched a tool and you actually got a pretty big user base behind it, and it was and most of it was built with no code, right?
Correct.
So tell us about that.
So we within Opportune, we built a web app. We built a single page web app that would connect to a customer's bank account. We would monitor their cash flow over time, and anytime the person was low, anytime their balance fell below a certain amount, we would immediately and automatically push funds into their bank account to make sure they didn't overdraft. And so as we, again, going back to kind of our, we found these platforms out of necessity. And now that we know them, it's just, they're such great, robust and powerful tools. But so that product that we built, as far as the front end, was completely built with Webflow. We leveraged additional tools like Airtable for database. We even leveraged Retool to build out a custom CRM for customer service representatives to easily look up customer information and help them facilitate interactions when a customer would reach out and ask questions. So those are three. I would say Retool is the most low code versus no code, and all three of them worked together in a way that we were actually able to produce a really amazing product experience and also customer service experience. So I think that's also incredibly important to think about, especially when you're developing not just a consumer facing app, but even business, is there's kind of that front end experience in which you want to give to the end user, whether it is consumer, business, what have you. But then there's also the customer experience aspect, in which if you're creative enough, there are tools that you can leverage that can sit on top, or in these cases below, that can really help you interact with the database and help you retrieve information to really create a great customer experience.
Yeah.
And so with this product, we used the entire front end. We built the entire front end with Webflow. We were able to wrap it all into a single page web application. And within about a year and a half of launching, we acquired 100,000 customers, and we pushed roughly $10 million through the application into customers' bank accounts.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's like just a kind of shows a great example of what a lot of people are skeptical about. They're like, oh, no code is not scalable. And I think that there are certain truths to that. And a lot of companies are trying to figure out ways to make it even more and more scalable. But yeah, I mean, I would say that, having 100,000 users and $10 million is pretty scalable already, right?
Yeah.
I've seen other use cases where it's like 250,000 users and like,
right.
So I think that argument is a bit archaic. And as you mentioned, the same way that you discovered these older tools, I think a lot of people went to this idea of like, oh, these are tools that I can build stuff with without code, and looked at them maybe 3, 5, even just 1 year ago, and they were just not there yet, right? And today we're absolutely at maturity points, and it's only accelerating. And I think that it's really the time where people should take a really good look at these platforms again, and see how they can leverage some of them for their own benefits.
Yeah. And in addition to that, I think a key thing for non-technical founders to understand, especially in the more early stages, is if you think that these tools aren't going to get you to scale, the key question that you need to ask yourselves is, am I even at scale yet? So don't try to solve problems that aren't relevant for you yet. And not to say that, you won't get there eventually. That'd be fantastic if you do. But even if you're thinking about that problem now, I think even by engaging with some of these tools early on, even if you have to bring on a back-end developer to, let's say, to integrate with a couple of APIs, or to kind of wrap it all up into for a nice end user experience, you're saving yourself potentially 50% or more of the entire development experience. You're not only saving yourself 50% time, but also 50% cost, And so I think you really want to think about what you're trying to build and what problems you're solving, and don't try to solve too many problems too soon, because these platforms are great at the early stages and even the late stages if you really kind of frame what you're trying to build correctly.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, Jason Calacanis, he got a question, which was like, because he's a big endorser of no code. He's maybe one of the VCs who's early on that train, and he's like saying yeah. And someone asked him the question, what was it? It was like something like, oh, how do VCs view if you built a platform with no code or not? And he starts off the whole thing saying, VCs won't even know that you built this thing with no code, first of all.
Yeah.
And when they do, the fact that you built this entire platform without having to hire expensive developers, they're going to think you know how to like hustle and bring things to market. So they'll be like
Yeah.
excited. And then if there are certain limitations to your technology, like, that's a good problem to have. If you have more than 250,000 users using it and you're generating a bunch of revenue and you need to do some custom coding stuff. So I think that the mentality is going to quickly change around a lot of these tools. And it's so funny because the same questions come over and over. But now let's talk about like what do you think some of the limitations are still in terms of no code tools? And then maybe we can go into like how you see this sort of moving forward, this whole movement.
Sure. Yeah, and to quickly piggyback on the last statement, I couldn't agree with Jason Kalakanakis more, because in my entire experience dealing with VCs, and at Flow, I met with probably 100. But again, lesson for entrepreneurs out there: all you need is one. And like, not one of them asked me, so what is your technical stack? Like they don't know, nor don't want to care. They want to see like what the end result is. And so don't be afraid that by going this path, you're not going to look good in front of investors, or they're going to be more skeptical of you. That has zero calculus unless you're building some AI self-driving car tool, but it has zero calculus in their decision. And so, but now to kind of jump back to the question, as much as I love these platforms, there are definitely certain limitations. And, one is, we ran into when we were developing the product with an Opportune, was just the mere fact that I needed a backend developer. So some of the things that I think need to improve, which after speaking with several folks, and my background and my kind of experiences in financial services, which is a highly regulated industry. So the first thing that I have to list off is security. It's been kind of well known that, certain of these platforms, if you host with them or you want to export the code and host yourself, there are certain vulnerabilities that do exist. If you're ever dealing with sensitive information, you want to understand like what problem you're trying to solve and what industry to understand. Do I have to, like, is the information I'm collecting sensitive? Do I have to encrypt it? Do I have to do certain things like that? So I think to truly understand what problem you're trying to solve, what industry you're in, and kind of the legal around it is important. So security, I think, is a big one that I think the low code, no code community can get a little better at. One additional one that I think is going to be accelerating over the next couple of years that I'm actually quite excited to see is better API integration, because software is going more and more into becoming an API world. Most products today you integrate with at least one. If you've ever signed up for an app and signed up with your phone number, you get a text back for the verification. That's using probably Twilio. If you've ever shared a photo, so many applications are working in the background that you never see, but so many of these are like critical to the functionality and the user experience that you want to deliver. So what I would love to see is more of these platforms taking kind of the most popular, the most widely used APIs and providing a really simple way for the users of these no code, low code platforms to build into it.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, there are certain platforms definitely like that. I'm guessing you don't work very much with Bubble, because Bubble does have like 930.
I have not used Bubble.
Yeah, 930 different APIs direct, and then there's like
well, there you go.
You have an API connector. So it's like, yeah, this stuff is already happening, and I think like Webflow, like that's one of the directions that they're starting to take. Like they just raised 73 million, and I think two of the big things they're going to do is like APIs, And then I think they're also, well, they've already announced really that they're going into mobile, like into mobile apps, like native mobile apps as well, which is an interesting move. Because I actually think that like native mobile apps are going to start dying a little bit. Like,
I agree.
Just because like the friction to get customers like downloading them, and then you think the number of apps that you have on your phone that you use on a daily basis, there aren't many, right?
No,
Fintech might be like one of the exceptions. Like, you know, everyone uses their banking app or like some kind of. But I think that we're gonna see a lot more. You know, like there's a lot more movement happening in like sort of the mobile web and web app space, I think.
Yeah, especially with 5G and things like that. Like the whole I remember a long time ago with a lot of the cross-platform development where you could build in one code base and easily port to iOS, Android. Still exists today, much better now. But the whole pitch for native was, it's a much better user experience. You could do things that you couldn't do in the browser. And while I still agree to a certain extent, that argument has definitely been dwindling over time. And I definitely think that more and more application development is going to just be pushed to the web. And eventually, like, you'll have the ability to easily pin apps to your home screen, so you don't have to download them, and you can, cache things in the browser, so you don't have to log in every time. And there's really interesting things that you can do through the browser that you couldn't do even 5 years ago. So yeah, I definitely agree with
that's super cool. I actually have a follow-up question for one of the things that you mentioned earlier, because one of the problems I see, like, I definitely know that, like, this idea of like security in certain industries, it's super, like, specifically fintech and banking. It's like, there's like this idea of security because, what if someone empties your bank account kind of thing. But so, I mean, a lot of people who are building first products in fintech, like, and they do it custom, are they able to keep up with these like really high standards for security? Because it seems to me like you probably would in many cases, and I'd love for you to disagree with me or whatever. The some of these no-code platforms have better security measures than some guy building custom from the ground up, right? So for the early stages, it might, I don't know. That's just a thought.
No, that is true. Again, it kind of comes down to what you're building and who your partners are. A lot of the times, what some can do to alleviate this is, and what a lot of times you're required to do is get, technical and cybersecurity insurance. These type of things are definitely visible, especially if you are moving money and things of that nature. Yeah, like there are ways where you can offload a lot of the security vulnerabilities to vendors and partners. But generally speaking, as like a lot of, especially as well in the enterprise, because a lot of enterprise folks I know, they really want and some require to host everything in their internal environment. I remember this was actually a big issue with Opportune in trying to host our CRM within Retool. We actually had to, because of cybersecurity issues, we had to host it on site. So we actually had to, license their technology and host it within our AWS environment. So that's kind of more what I'm talking about in terms of like
totally
the larger enterprises. They want to own that, like, they want to own it and they want it in their environment. And there are some limitations to that if you want to leverage some of the no-code tools. Although in Webflow, you could just, export everything and then just, host it in your own AWS and things like that, which is, a bit different. But so again, like I think that this is a typical concern that I have seen with larger enterprises, and this is some of the first things that they talk about. But I think a lot of these platforms are directly addressing them and getting much better at these things.
So what do you think the direction that this is all going to take in terms of like no-code tools? Like, we had a quick conversation talking about like, are they going to go vertical specific? Like, where do you see this all going? Like, what is the what is the future of no code tools, right? Because even me, I mean, I'm receiving decks all the time with new people building new platforms for no code.
Hmm.
And I see it from being like, certain things which are like how to leverage things through API, or others building full platforms focused around that. And
Yeah.
as you mentioned that like certain industries are a little bit different than others, like, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. No. I mentioned two things that I would love to see. One, which is great. I'm going to check out Bubble right after this. Um, but it was the security and kind of like infrastructure around that, the ability to easily connect to APIs and leverage the data flowing through your system. The third, is which I'm actually very excited about. I'm not sure like what the time scale is, but the ability to add artificial intelligence to some of these platforms that would help accelerate your own kind of design and capability. So I remember not too long ago there were a couple platforms in which let's say I was a restaurant owner. I can go to a platform and kind of within a matter of words tell this platform what I wanted to build, and they leverage AI. I think it was like fairly rudimentary at the time, but they would have the AI try to basically build you a site based on your inputs. I'm a restaurant in this location. I want to show my map. I want to show hours. I want the ability to have takeout orders. And because, there's so many workflows that are done over and over and over again. I think this is one of like the biggest values that low or no code can bring to the table. I think this is where a lot of like the open source GitHub stuff really excels, which is a lot of apps have, let's say, a registration to sign up flow. There's no need for a developer to build that 100 different times through 100 different companies. It usually always works the same. And so having like a artificial intelligence layer to understand what most of the web has available to them, and helping non-technical people accelerate and amplify their skill sets through things like Webflow, by either like replicating experiences, interactions, automatically creating you a style guide. Like these things can be hugely beneficial, and really accelerate your time to market. So that'd be the third one that I'm quite interested in. And then the fourth and last one is around this like the verticalization of workflows and tools and things like this. Because again, this kind of is piggybacking off the last one, but I think in fintech as an example, there's a lot of workflows and processes and integrations that are widely used across the board. You have to run identity checks. There's a process for that. That happens in onboarding. If you want to connect to a bank account, you typically do with Plaid or MX or Finicity. There's a process for that. If you want to show your available balance, if you want to do categorization of your transactions. So there's a lot of things that a lot of people want. So it's like it's replicated across the board. And then, as another example let's call it social, a lot of people have a profile. You have connections, whether it's one-to-one or one-to-many, share capability. So what I would love to see is these platforms taking a more vertically approach to say, okay, what do you want to build? I want to build a social app where I can find relevant things to do during quarantine. And so, leveraging what the no code community has built in terms of workflows, to be able to easily like reach in and grab one, drop it into my project, I think would be a tremendous acceleration to the whole movement. Because again, I built things with my last product that I'm sure many future users of these platforms would like to leverage. And so my ability to almost like open that up in an open source way and say like, hey, here's my registration flow. Here's how it works. Here's how we save things to the database, and package it up in a way that's super easy for your next project to use.
We'll have to speak offline about that, because I'll show you a couple things with Bubble that you'll be able to. But I love that. I think that it's interesting, like verticalizing it really is an interesting thing, because it's like saying, there are certain concerns in the fintech world that everyone needs to do. So maybe there's going to be a tool, and it's going to be the best tool for all things built fintech, right? There might be another one in healthcare, like, oh, we have to be super HIPAA compliant, we have to be this, that, the other. There are a different set of concerns, and platforms will start emerging that are focused around those things. But I also love this idea, which I think is starting with sort of APIs and people building sort of siloed sort of experiences that you can leverage through APIs. Is this idea of like open sourcing, just like the power of AI, the power of VR. And I'm already starting to see some of those things happen. So I agree with you. This is just super exciting. I think that
because one thing that it also does is which I think is so important for something like this, is it creates community. And I think the developer community is so strong and so powerful. I mean, it's been this way for years, but to have that same sort of excitement and intellectual conversation and kind of free service that was done in the developer community with open source and GitHub and things like that, if we can kind of leverage that same excitement and openness through this no code movement, I think that is going to be a huge win for everybody.
Yeah. And I think that it's like, that's so funny, because it's such a small community. There's so few people who know about no code. And yet a lot of people in this market are kind of like, use my solution, use my solution. And so that's one of the things that we're doing with We Are No Code, is saying like, hey, we are no code, like all of us together. This is like an industry. And so since we don't have a proprietary platform ourselves, and we're really focused on like guiding humans towards specific tools that will be best fit for what they're trying to build, we suddenly are able to like bring these people together and be like, hey, Airtable, and people like Webflow and Airtable have already understood this already, because they depend on certain other tools. But yeah, the more that we come together and have this like larger voice in the industry that says, hey, let's focus on the humans who are leveraging this and building community around that. And I think that there's a long way to go, but it's accelerating very quickly. So with that said, thanks so much for joining. Where can people find you?
So you can find me on, right now, LinkedIn. I hate to say it, I'm not a big social media guy, so I don't have a Twitter handle, not really on Facebook, but if you want to connect, please reach out to me through LinkedIn. Max Klein, Christian, if you don't mind, you put my LinkedIn URL. But yeah, if you want to reach out and talk further about anything that I've mentioned, anything fintech related, would love to connect.
Max, it's always such a pleasure to chat with you. I wish you the best of luck. I know that you're a lot of things are simmering for you at the moment, so I look forward to see what happens next and what awesome thing you build.
Thank you, man. We'll catch up soon.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.